She was only there to submit her application, that's all. But when her sleeve slipped down, revealing fresh finger-shaped bruises, the whole room went silent. Roman Vescari didn't yell. He didn't bang on the table. He just stared. And in those 3 seconds of silence, 17 of the city's most seasoned men understood that someone was about to disappear from the map. Which city are you watching from? Like and comment with your city name. I want to know how far this story has gone. The rain had been falling since noon and showed no sign of stopping. By 9 o'clock that evening, the streets 47 floors below Blackthorn Tower looked like open wounds. Black pavement split by red and white headlights. Ambulance sirens bleeding through the wet air. The whole city running like ink in the downpour. Up here, behind floor-to-ceiling glass, none of that noise reached you. The building swallowed sound the way Roman Vescari swallowed problems. Completely, and without leaving a trace. The conference room smelled like expensive leather and suppressed fear. 11 men sat or stood around the long obsidian table, and not one of them had spoken voluntarily in the last 4 minutes. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was the kind of silence that had weight, the kind that pressed against your chest and made you aware of every shallow breath you took. 2 of the men near the window had stopped making eye contact with each other 20 minutes ago. The man closest to the door had his right hand resting flat on his thigh, fingers spread wide, like he was reminding himself to stay still. Roman stood at the head of the table with his back partially turned to the room, looking out at the rain. He hadn't raised his voice once during the entire meeting. He hadn't needed to. The shipment was gone. $12 million in transit product, rerouted through a ghost manifest, and vanished somewhere between the Port Newark facility and the Blackthorn distribution warehouse 3 days ago. And the 8 men responsible for that stretch of the supply chain were currently in this room trying to explain how something like that happened without any of them noticing. They couldn't. Roman turned from the window slowly. He was 39 years old and had the kind of face that made people nervous even when it showed nothing. A long jaw, deep-set gray eyes that processed everything and gave back almost nothing, dark hair going silver at the temples in a way that looked deliberate rather than aged. He moved with the unhurried precision of a man who had never once needed to rush because things arranged themselves around him. His suit was charcoal. His cufflinks caught the light when he adjusted his sleeve. He looked at the man directly across from him, Petrov, his logistics coordinator for the eastern ports, a thick-necked Ukrainian who had worked for Roman for 6 years without a single operational failure, until now. "Say that again," Roman said. Petrov's jaw tightened. "The manifest was falsified at origin, not at our end. Whoever did it had access to—" "I heard you the first time," Roman's voice was flat. "I'm asking you to say it again because I want to understand what you're telling me. You're telling me that $12 million walked out of my operation and nobody in this room saw it coming. That's what you're telling me." Petrov said nothing. Nobody said anything. Roman picked up the single sheet of paper in front of him, the incident summary his head of operations had prepared, and read it once more without any visible reaction. Then he set it down and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose briefly, the only physical indication that he was anything other than completely composed. "Garrett." The man to his left straightened. Mid-40s, former federal contractor, eyes like 2 holes drilled through slate. "Yes, sir. I want full audits on every manifest filed from Newark and Bayonne in the last 60 days. Cross-reference the routing data against the GPS logs from our transport contractors. If the discrepancy started before the shipment, I want to know when. If there are other ghost entries, I want them flagged before morning." "Understood. And I want whoever authorized the falsified origin documentation identified by name before I go to sleep tonight." Garrett nodded once and pulled out his phone without another word. Roman looked at the rest of the room. "The $12 million is gone," he said. "I'm not interested in recovering it. I'm interested in understanding exactly how it left, who allowed it to leave, and whether anyone in this building was compensated for their cooperation." He paused. "If someone was, and they tell me before I find out myself, that conversation will be unpleasant but survivable. If I find out another way—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That was when the door opened. Marcus, his chief of security, stepped in with the careful movements of a man interrupting a surgery. He was 6'4" and built like a structural wall, but right now his face carried the expression of someone who had calculated risk and decided to proceed anyway. "Sir," Marcus kept his voice low, "your new assistant is here for her 9 o'clock orientation. She wasn't informed the conference room would be in use." Roman didn't look up from the table. "Not now." "Yes, sir." A pause. "She's already—" The door opened the rest of the way. She came in carrying a thick accordion file pressed against her chest with both arms, the kind of grip that white-knuckled without the person realizing it. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a loose bun that had partially escaped during what was probably a long commute in the rain. Her coat was still damp at the shoulders. Her shoes were practical flats, slightly worn at the heel. She had the look of someone who had spent years trying to take up as little space as possible, shoulders slightly forward, chin not quite lifted, eyes that moved quickly around a room to catalog exits and expressions before settling anywhere. She froze the moment she realized what she'd walked into. 11 men, all staring, the atmospheric pressure of barely contained tension so thick it was almost physical. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately, voice low. "I didn't realize. I was told conference room B—" "It's fine," Roman said. His tone hadn't changed. Still flat, still controlled. He was already looking back down at the paper in front of him, already beginning to dismiss the interruption as a minor administrative error that could be corrected in 30 seconds. She moved forward to set the files on the corner of the table, reaching past the nearest chair to find an unoccupied surface. And that was when it happened. The sleeve of her blouse slid back. Just an inch. Maybe 2. Roman wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the incident summary. But peripheral vision is an autonomous thing, and something in the shape of what he saw made his eyes move before his conscious attention did. The bruises were purple going to yellow at the edges, which meant they were several days old at minimum. They wrapped the inside of her wrist in a pattern that was unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in rooms where violence happened regularly. Not from a fall, not from impact against a surface. The spacing was wrong for that. The shape was wrong. These were from fingers. A hand had gripped her wrist hard enough and long enough to leave that. Evelyn Mercer felt his gaze and pulled her sleeve down in a motion so practiced it was nearly invisible. The quick adjustment of someone who had done it 100 times in front of 100 different people and learned to make it look like nothing. A small, self-conscious gesture, probably meant to read as straightening her cuff. It didn't read that way to Roman. He was still holding the paper. His hands hadn't moved. His expression hadn't changed. But something in the room shifted. The men who knew Roman well felt it first. A slight recalibration in the atmosphere, like the air pressure dropping 2 seconds before a storm hit. Garrett stopped typing on his phone. Petrov, who had been carefully studying the tabletop, looked up without knowing why. Roman set the paper down. "Leave us." 2 words, perfectly even. No inflection. 11 men moved toward the door with quiet, efficient speed. Nobody asked a question. Nobody looked at the girl. Marcus was last out, and he pulled the door shut behind him with a soft click that sounded in the sudden silence like something final. Evelyn stood near the corner of the table with the accordion file in her arms and her sleeve pulled back to her wrist. She was looking at the floor. Her breathing was careful. Too careful. The kind of careful that people develop when they've learned that breathing too loudly could be interpreted as a provocation. Roman hadn't moved from the head of the table. "I'm sorry for the interruption," she said. "I can come back." "Who hurt you?" The question landed in the silence without ceremony. No preamble, no softening. Just the question itself, direct as a blade. Evelyn went very still. The accordion file shifted slightly in her grip as her arms tensed. She didn't look up. "I don't—" She stopped. Started again. "I'm fine. I just—" "Look at me." She looked up. Roman was walking around the end of the table toward her. Not fast, not threatening in the obvious way. No aggression in the movement, no forward lean, no raised voice. Just closing distance with the same measured calm he brought to everything, which was somehow worse than aggression would have been. Aggression she knew how to respond to. She had an entire internal playbook for aggression. This she didn't know what to do with. She took one step back before she realized she'd done it. Roman stopped. He had seen that step. The instinctive retreat. The way her whole body had recalculated without her choosing to. He understood what that meant. It wasn't him specifically she was flinching from. It was the category of thing he represented. A man, moving toward her in an enclosed space. The flinch was old, trained in. That kind of response didn't develop overnight. He stayed where he was and looked at her face. There was more. Beneath the foundation at her collarbone, a shadow too deep and too blue to be a natural shadow, visible when she had tilted her head slightly when she came through the door. He hadn't registered it consciously then, but his mind had filed it. He was registering it now. "I fell," she said. The words came out flat and pre-assembled, the way a rehearsed line comes out of someone who has delivered it enough times that it no longer requires thought. Roman looked at her for a long moment. "That's a lie," he said. Not an accusation, not harsh, just factual. The same tone he'd used to correct a calculation on a financial report. Evelyn's throat moved. "Mr. Vescari." "Roman," she blinked. "Your name," he said. "What is it?" "Evelyn. Evelyn Mercer." He nodded once like he was confirming something he already half knew. "Evelyn, you transferred from the Aldgate financial subsidiary." "Yes." 3 weeks ago." She paused. 2.5. "And before that, you were at Dunmore Capital for 2 years, junior operations coordinator." He wasn't asking. "You graduated from Carlisle State, business administration. You applied to 3 firms before Dunmore and were rejected by all 3. She stared at him. "How do you—" "I know who works for me." He said it simply, without arrogance. Just clarity. "What I didn't know until 5 minutes ago is that someone has been hurting you." The word, hurting, landed differently than she expected it to. It wasn't clinical, it wasn't bureaucratic, it was just accurate, and the accuracy of it had a specific weight that pressed against something behind her sternum. Evelyn gripped the file folder harder. It's a personal matter. It has nothing to do with a personal matter." Roman repeated the phrase without inflection. "Yes. Someone put their hands on you." She said nothing. "And you're calling that a personal matter?" "Mr. Vescari?" "Roman." She exhaled once. "Roman. I appreciate—" She stopped. Started differently. "I don't need intervention. Have the situation managed." Roman looked at her wrist, then back at her face. The gesture was brief but completely unambiguous in what it said about his assessment of the situation being managed. Evelyn felt her face heat. "I know how this looks." "How does it look?" "Like I can't handle my own life." "No." He said it immediately. "It looks like someone has been convincing you that you can't handle your own life. That's different." She didn't have a response ready for that. The silence stretched. Outside, far below, the rain was still falling, barely audible against the glass, just a faint background static. Roman walked to the wet bar along the east wall and poured 2 fingers of water from the crystal pitcher there. He set the glass on the corner of the table nearest to her, close enough to reach but not placed in her hand, not presuming she would want it, just making it available. Then he walked back to his chair at the head of the table and sat down. The distance helped. She could see him recalibrate the space between them deliberately, and something in her chest unclenched fractionally. "Sit down," he said. "Not because I'm telling you to, because you've been standing for a while and you look tired." She sat. It took a second. The internal negotiation of it, the instinct that said sitting down meant giving something up, meant making herself smaller in a different way. But she sat, and Roman didn't look at her like it meant anything, and somehow that was its own kind of relief. "His name," Roman said. Evelyn shook her head slowly. "I'm not doing this." "You're not telling me his name." "I'm not doing any of this. Whatever this is. I just came to drop off the quarterly filing documents and—" "His name, Evelyn." The way he said her name, not gentle, not coaxing, just level, made the hair on the back of her neck stand up for reasons she couldn't immediately categorize. "You can't do anything," she said. "It's not—" There's nothing to be done that I haven't already thought about. Roman was quiet for a moment. You've thought about leaving him. Her silence was the answer. And something stopped you every time. Still nothing. Money, he said. The lease is in his name, probably. Or yours is, but he controls access to it. Transportation, phone plan. Your income goes somewhere he has visibility into. Her face was doing something she was trying to prevent it from doing. The people you would normally call, Roman continued, he's already made complicated. Either they don't know, or they know and don't ask because it makes things easier for them not to, or he said enough things about you to enough of them that you're not sure who you can trust. Evelyn's jaw was tight. You've been operating alone, Roman said. For a while. Stop, she said quietly. He stopped. Not immediately. One beat of continuation, just long enough to let the last word land. Then silence. Evelyn pressed her fingers flat against the table surface. She was looking at the wood grain like it required concentration. His name is Daniel, she said finally. Daniel Cross. Roman didn't move, didn't react outwardly. How long? 3 years, almost. Has he threatened you about leaving? A pause that was itself an answer. Yes. Physically or specifically? She didn't ask what the distinction meant. Both. Roman nodded. He reached forward and pressed the intercom button on the console built into the table. Marcus. Sir? The response was immediate. Marcus had been just outside the door. I need a background pull. Full spectrum. Name is Daniel Cross. Let's verify spelling. He looked at Evelyn. Cross, she said, with a kind of automated obedience that suggested she had stopped deciding whether to cooperate. I need financial records, property records, criminal history, including sealed, any known associates, and current employment and residential address. Roman released the intercom. He looked at Evelyn. What does he do? He manages a portfolio at Meridian Wealth Group. Roman's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, just the faintest compression around his eyes. He pressed the intercom again. Add current employer, Meridian Wealth Group. Evelyn looked at him. Why does his employer matter? Roman looked back at her. It probably doesn't, he said, but I like complete information. She absorbed that. What are you going to do? She asked. Tonight? Nothing. He said it plainly. Tonight, I'm going to make sure you have a car and a driver taking you home instead of the subway. I'm going to have someone verify that your building is clear before you go inside. And I'm going to read the information Marcus brings me. And then? And then I'll know more than I know right now. Evelyn stared at him. That's not an answer. It's the honest one. He stood. You're not in a position where I can hand you a complete solution tonight and send you home. But you're also not in the position you were in an hour ago, which is alone. She opened her mouth, closed it. The files you brought, Roman said. Leave them on the table. Sandra from operations will file them in the morning. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and put it on with the precise movements of a man who had trained himself out of carelessness. Come on, I'll have Marcus walk you down. Evelyn didn't move immediately. Why are you doing this? She asked. Roman paused. He looked at her across the table. This woman he had met 40 minutes ago, who had walked into the worst possible room at the worst possible time and had the misfortune of letting her sleeve slip. And he thought about how to answer honestly without answering in a way that made this about him. Because you work for me, he said, and I take care of what's mine. It should have sounded possessive, transactional, reducing. Coming from him, in that tone, it didn't. It sounded like the first promise anyone had made her in a very long time. Evelyn Mercer picked up her bag from the chair beside her. She didn't say thank you. She didn't know how right now, and some part of her understood that he didn't need it from her. She walked toward the door. Behind her, Roman Vescari stood alone in the conference room with the rain still falling against 47 floors of glass, already thinking about Daniel Cross, already thinking about Meridian Wealth Group, and why that name felt like a splinter he needed to find before it went deeper. By midnight, he would know the reason. And Daniel Cross's life, as he currently understood it, was already over. The car that took Evelyn home that night was black and clean and silent, And the driver didn't speak once during the 40-minute ride through rain-slicked streets. He just drove. No questions, no small talk, no sideways glances in the rear-view mirror that she would have had to pretend not to notice. She sat in the back seat with her bag in her lap and her hands folded on top of it and watched the city slide past the window like something happening to someone else. The building where she lived was a 6-story walk-up in Ridgewood that had been nice once, maybe 15 years ago, and was now just functional. The kind of building where the hallway lights buzzed and the elevator was out half the time, and people kept their eyes down in the lobby because eye contact felt like a commitment they hadn't budgeted for. She had liked it once. The apartment had good light in the mornings, and the woman downstairs played piano on Sunday afternoons, and the neighborhood smelled like bread from the bakery on the corner. Now she mostly noticed the fact that the front door lock was loose, and the deadbolt on her unit could be forced with enough pressure, and the windows faced the street so that anyone standing on the sidewalk could see the light come on when she got home. Daniel noticed things like that. Tactical things. Entry points. The driver pulled to the curb and reached into the glove compartment without being asked and removed a business card, which he passed back to her between 2 fingers. Just a number. No name, no logo. "You call that if anything feels wrong," he said. "Day or night, someone answers." Evelyn looked at the card, then at the back of his head. "Did he tell you to say that?" "He told me to make sure you got inside safe." A pause. "The rest is just common sense." She got out of the car. The man on the sidewalk near the stoop, not the driver, a second man she hadn't noticed until this moment, standing against the brick facade with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the specific quality of stillness that belonged to people who had been trained in it, gave her a small nod and then looked back at the street. Evelyn went inside. She stood in her apartment with the lights off for almost 2 minutes before she turned them on. Daniel wasn't there. She knew he wasn't. His shoes weren't by the door, and the particular quality of dread that preceded his presence was absent, but she checked anyway. Bedroom, bathroom, the narrow kitchen, the closet by the front door where he sometimes stood, she had once discovered, when he was trying to know how long it took her to realize she wasn't alone. She was alone. She sat on the edge of the bed and put the business card on the nightstand and looked at it for a long time. Then she took out her phone and looked at the 12 unanswered messages from Daniel, all sent in the last 3 hours, the tone escalating from interrogative to cold to the specific flavor of quiet that meant he was saving things up. She didn't open them. She put the phone face down on the nightstand next to the card. In the dark, she thought about the way Roman Vescari had said, "You're not in the position you were in an hour ago." She thought about what that meant, whether it was true, whether it mattered. She thought about Daniel's face when he got angry, not the yelling, which she had almost normalized, but the moment just before it, when something in him went flat and distant, and she would feel her own body start to calculate. She didn't sleep much. By 6 in the morning, she was already dressed. Roman had been awake since 4:30. The file Marcus brought him at midnight was 41 pages. He read it twice, and by the second reading, he had stopped noticing the coffee cooling beside him and was sitting in complete stillness with the particular focus of a man who has just found something he was not expecting to find. Daniel Cross was 34 years old, born in Hartford. 2 prior addresses in the city before the current Williamsburg apartment he shared with Evelyn, whose name, Roman noted, was the only one on the lease. Cross had no property of his own. His employment at Meridian Wealth Group was legitimate on the surface. Senior portfolio coordinator, good salary, clean public record. But the financial forensics Marcus had pulled overnight told a different story. There were 3 accounts operating under shell LLCs that didn't survive casual scrutiny. Companies registered at addresses that turned out to be mail forwarding services, with account activity that moved in patterns Roman recognized immediately and viscerally because he had spent 20 years building systems that moved money in exactly those patterns. Daniel Cross was laundering, not small amounts, not amateur work. The transactions totaled roughly $4 million over 18 months, cycled through what appeared to be a legitimate investment management wrapper, but had the signature architecture of someone who had received instruction. Someone had taught him this. And the money, when Roman traced its directional flow through the accounts, passed through a routing intermediary that appeared in 3 separate transaction records Roman's own operations team had flagged over the past year as anomalous. It passed through a shell nested inside a larger shell, nested inside a holding company registered in Delaware under a name Roman knew, Colton Freight Solutions. Colton Freight was one of 6 lower-tier shipping contractors Roman used for short-haul distribution along the eastern seaboard, a minor operation. Subcontracted, not directly owned. Roman had inherited it when he absorbed a smaller logistics network 4 years ago and had never bothered to fully audit the subsidiary relationships because the revenue was clean and the volume was manageable. He sat very still for a while after that. Daniel Cross was not just an abusive man who happened to date a woman who happened to get hired at Blackthorn. Daniel Cross was laundering money through a contractor nested inside Roman's own distribution network, without permission, without Roman's knowledge, without, and this was the part that landed with particular weight, any apparent awareness that the woman he had been systematically destroying for the past 3 years had just walked directly into the office of the man whose operation he was parasitizing. Roman closed the file. He pressed the intercom. Marcus. Sir. Immediate. Marcus had not gone home. Get me everything on Colton Freight. Full audit. I want the contractor relationship history, every transaction involving that entity in the last 24 months, and I want to know who at Colton has had direct communication with Daniel Cross. A pause of about 2 seconds, long enough to absorb the implication. Understood. Tonight? Now. He released the intercom. He sat back and looked at the rain still running down the glass. There was a version of this situation that was clean and contained. Daniel Cross had made himself Roman's problem through the laundering. That gave Roman legitimate operational justification to act. Whatever happened next could be framed as protecting the integrity of the network. Efficient, defensible. But Roman knew, sitting there in the dark with the file closed in front of him, that the laundering wasn't what had made his jaw tighten when he looked at that file. The laundering was almost secondary, almost incidental. What made his jaw tighten was the lease in Evelyn's name. The escalating text messages Marcus had noted in the surveillance overview. The photograph, one Marcus had pulled from a public social media archive since deleted, showing Evelyn at some charity function 8 months ago, smiling with too much effort, her left arm positioned carefully, Daniel Cross's hand at the small of her back in a way that read as ownership rather than affection. Roman had looked at that photograph for a long time. He recognized the smile. His mother had a version of that smile in every photograph from a 12-year stretch of his childhood. He closed that thought before it opened into something larger. There was work to do. Evelyn arrived at Blackthorn Tower at 8:52 the next morning. She came through the lobby and the security guard at the desk, a man named Fowler, who had never voluntarily spoken to her during her 2.5 weeks of employment, looked up and said, "Good morning, Ms. Mercer," with the practiced neutrality of someone following a revised instruction. She stopped walking. Fowler held eye contact for 1 second, then looked back at his desk. Evelyn continued to the elevator. On the 47th floor, Sandra from operations, a sharp, efficient woman in her late 40s who had treated Evelyn with the pleasant indifference typically extended to temporary hires, was waiting near the reception desk with a coffee and a folded schedule. "Your desk has been moved," Sandra said, handing both over simultaneously. Evelyn blinked. "Moved?" "To the inner office, adjacent to Mr. Vescari's suite. You'll share a wall with his PA, Kieran. Kieran will walk you through the system access this morning." She paused, examining Evelyn's face for something she apparently didn't find, then nodded once. "The coffee is how you take it," I guessed. It was oat milk, 1 sugar. It was exactly how she took it. Evelyn didn't ask how Sandra knew. She was beginning to understand that asking how tended to lead to explanations that raised more questions. The inner office was different from the open floor where she had been sitting. It was quieter. The desk was better. The sightlines were different. From here, she could see both the elevator bank and Roman's suite door, and she realized after a moment that the positioning was deliberate. Anyone approaching from either direction was visible to her from this desk. She was inside the perimeter now. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. Kieran was 26, compact, and moved with the quick efficiency of someone who treated every task as a variable in a larger optimization problem. He spent 40 minutes walking her through the scheduling systems and communication protocols with the focused briskness of someone who had been told to do this and intended to do it correctly. He didn't ask her anything personal. He didn't look at her sleeves. At 10:15, Roman's suite door opened. He came out already in motion, jacket on, phone in one hand, a red-flagged folder in the other, and stopped when he saw her at the desk without stopping long enough to make the stop obvious. "You're here," he said. "I'm here," she said. He looked at her once, not at her sleeves, at her face. The way you look at someone when you're checking whether they're actually all right versus performing all right. She held the look. "I'm fine. I didn't ask." "You were about to." Something moved across his expression. Brief, almost like the start of something that didn't have permission to finish yet. "There's a briefing at 11 in the East Conference Room," he said. "I need the Aldgate subsidiary filings from Q3 cross-referenced against the current quarter before then. Kieran can show you where the—" "I know where they are," she said. "I came from Aldgate." Another beat. "Right." He nodded. "Have it ready by 10:50. He moved toward the elevator, then stopped. Without turning, "Did you sleep?" Evelyn's hands were already on the keyboard. "Enough." The elevator doors opened and he stepped in and they closed and he was gone. She exhaled. Kieran, who had been very deliberately not watching this exchange, said from his desk, "He's not usually that—" He stopped. "That what?" Evelyn said. Kieran appeared to reconsider his entire sentence. "Communicative," he said finally. She pulled up the Aldgate filings and said nothing. Daniel called at 11:47. She was at her desk eating a sandwich she hadn't tasted and reviewing a distribution compliance summary when her personal phone lit up with his name. She looked at it long enough to count to 6. Then she rejected the call. He called again at 11:49. She rejected it again. The text came 30 seconds later. "I saw the car last night. Who was driving you?" She put the phone face down. He called again at noon. Then at 12:15. Then a text that said pick up and another that said, "I'm not angry, I just want to talk," which was the specific combination of words that meant he was very angry and the talking was not going to be talking. She was composing a quarterly allocation summary when the phone buzzed again, and she looked at it without meaning to and saw, "If you're pulling something, I will find out. I always find out." Her hands had stopped moving on the keyboard. She was aware of this. She told them to start again. They didn't immediately comply. "Ms. Mercer." She looked up. Marcus was standing at the entrance to the inner office. He was looking at her phone on the desk, specifically at the lit screen, specifically at the message visible on it. His face showed nothing, but his eyes were doing something with the information. "Mr. Vescari would like you to bring the Aldgate summary to the East Conference Room." He paused. "The meeting ran long. They need it now." "Yes." She stood, picked up the tablet with the summary, then, without fully deciding to, picked up her phone and showed Marcus the screen. He looked at it. He didn't say anything. He just took out his own phone, photographed her screen with one quick motion, and put his phone away. "Go ahead in," he said. "I'll be outside." She went in. The East Conference Room held 7 people when she entered. Garrett, 2 of his security directors, a legal compliance officer named Rashi, and 3 men she didn't recognize who had the particular quality of people who flew in for meetings and flew back out without leaving names and calendars. Roman was at the head of the table with the controlled intensity of someone mid-argument. He looked up when she entered. Something in him settled, almost imperceptibly. She set the tablet on the table beside him without interrupting. He picked it up and kept talking. She left. In the hallway outside, Marcus was on his phone with his back to her. She caught fragments. "Escalating contact. Yes, I have screenshots. No, not yet. He doesn't." And then Marcus turned, saw her, and the phone went to his side without ending the call. "Go back to your desk," he said. Not unkindly. She went back to her desk. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Daniel appeared in the Blackthorn Tower lobby. She didn't know this immediately. She found out because Fowler at the security desk denied him access. Politely, professionally, using the specific language of buildings that had been told to deny someone access without making it obvious that the denial was targeted. and Daniel had apparently stood in the lobby for 4 minutes, making increasingly pointed requests to speak with someone in human resources about a personal matter before Fowler called up to Marcus. She found out because Marcus came to her desk at 2:47 and said, "Your phone. Personal calls need to go outside the building or not at all during working hours. Standing policy." Evelyn looked at him. "He was in the lobby," she said. "He was in the lobby." Her stomach turned over once. "Is he? He's gone. He'll be told that trespassing on private commercial property is a chargeable offense if he returns without a scheduled appointment." Marcus's voice was level, bureaucratic, deliberately ordinary. "That's standard." "He doesn't take standard well." "I know." Marcus looked at her directly. "That's also noted." He left. Evelyn sat at her desk for the next hour doing work she could not later have described in detail. Her hands moved, the screens changed. She answered 2 emails and forwarded a calendar request and pulled 3 documents from the archive system. Somewhere in between, she ate the last half of the sandwich and tasted none of it. At 5 o'clock, Roman came out of his suite. He looked at her desk, at her face, at the particular set of her shoulders, which apparently told him something because he stopped walking and said, "What happened?" "Daniel came to the building." Roman went very still. "He was in the lobby," she added, because the stillness required something to fill it. "Marcus handled it. He's gone." Roman didn't say anything for a moment. "When?" he said. "About 2:30? He nodded once. That small nod that meant he was filing it in the part of his brain where tactical information lived and cross-referencing it against other things she wasn't privy to. "Go home with Marcus tonight," he said. "Don't use your own phone to call anyone until I talk to you tomorrow." "Why not my own phone?" "Because I don't know yet whether he has access to your carrier account." She stared at him. "Does he?" Roman asked. The pause was the answer. "When did you give him access?" Not an accusation, a timeline question. "I didn't. He set up the plan 2 years ago. It's in his name." Roman's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Tomorrow morning, first thing, we're replacing your phone. New number, new account, nothing linked to anything he has visibility into." He paused. "I should have done that last night. That's on me." Evelyn shook her head. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." The simplicity of it silenced her. She gathered her bag, stood, looked at him across the small distance between her desk and his door. "Roman." He looked at her. "What did you find in the background check?" She said it levelly, watching his face. "You found something more than just his history with me." "I can see it." Roman held her gaze for a long moment. "We'll talk about it tomorrow," he said. "Tell me now." Another pause. The kind where a decision gets made. "Daniel Cross has been moving money," Roman said, "through a contractor in my distribution network, without my knowledge." The room was very quiet. Evelyn processed that. "How long?" 18 months? Possibly longer. How much?" "Enough." She understood what she was looking at then. The moved desk, the driver, the security guard who suddenly knew her name. The way Marcus photographed that text message without being asked. It wasn't only about her. Roman hadn't been building a protective structure around a traumatized employee out of pure instinct or decency alone, although she believed, looking at him, that some part of it was that. But Daniel had made himself Roman's problem in a different way entirely. And now the 2 problems occupied the same space. "He doesn't know," she said slowly. "Daniel doesn't know I work for you." "No," Roman said. "He doesn't know yet." The word yet sat in the air between them. "When he finds out," Evelyn said carefully. "He'll panic," Roman said. "Men like that panic in predictable ways." "What ways?" Roman's eyes met hers directly. "They reach for the thing they think they still control." The implication settled over her like cold water. She was the thing Daniel thought he still controlled. She was standing in Roman Viscari's inner office, 47 floors above a city that was already in motion around something she hadn't fully understood the shape of yet. And somewhere below, in Williamsburg maybe, or in a car circling the block, or standing outside a building he'd been told not to enter, Daniel Cross was one piece of information away from becoming something worse than he already was. She picked up her bag. "I want to know everything you found," she said. "Tomorrow. All of it." Roman looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite approval, but was adjacent to it. "All right." She walked toward the elevator. Behind her, Roman picked up his phone and was already dialing before she reached the hallway, his voice dropping to something quiet and precise that she didn't try to hear. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. In his office, Roman Vescari said into the phone, "I need Cross under surveillance starting tonight, full coverage, and I need the Colton Freight audit moved to priority. I want names by morning." A pause, listening, then, "No, not yet. He doesn't move until I decide he moves." He lowered the phone, looked at the door Evelyn had just passed through. Then he looked at the file still open on his desk. The 41 pages, and the one page near the back he had read 3 times and not yet mentioned to anyone, because the name on it wasn't Daniel Cross's name, and it wasn't Roman's name, and it belonged to someone Roman had believed, had been very careful to believe, was no longer a variable in his life. The name on that page was Vincent Harlow. And Vincent Harlow was supposed to be dead. Vincent Harlow had been declared dead on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 years ago, in a federal district court filing that Roman's legal team had obtained, verified, and filed away with the quiet finality of a closed chapter. The declaration had come through a cooperative arrangement, the kind that existed in the gray architecture between legitimate law enforcement and the operational realities of men like Roman, where information moved in both directions and everyone pretended the exchange was something other than what it was. A federal witness protection relocation that went wrong, a fire in a Tucson safe house, dental records that matched, a casket that went into the ground in a cemetery outside Phoenix with 2 federal marshals present and nobody else. Roman had not attended. He had received the confirmation, read it once, and moved forward. That was the thing about building an empire on the assumption that your enemies were manageable. You had to believe your information was correct. Because if your information was wrong, then the entire architecture of decisions you had built on top of it was constructed on air. Vincent Harlow. Roman sat alone in his office at 11:43 at night, with the file open to that page, and thought carefully about everything he had believed for 3 years, and everything that belief had allowed him to stop watching. Harlow had been Roman's operations director for 4 years before the betrayal. Before the federal investigation that had nearly dismantled everything, the 2 lieutenants who had disappeared into custody, the 18 months of legal exposure that had cost Roman $30 million in legal fees and settlements and restructuring. Harlow had fed information to a competing syndicate, the Morettis, as it turned out, though Roman hadn't been able to prove the connection cleanly enough to act on it at the time. Harlow had access to everything: distribution routes, account structures, personnel, the kind of comprehensive operational knowledge that, in the wrong hands, was essentially a map to everything Roman had built. And now his name was appearing in the transaction records of a shell company connected to Daniel Cross. Not prominently, not obviously. It was a single signatory name buried in the registration documents of a Delaware LLC that was itself buried 3 layers deep in the holding structure Cross was using to move money. The kind of thing you wouldn't find unless you were looking specifically at the document trail rather than the money trail. Marcus had flagged it as anomalous, a name that appeared in their system history as a high alert designation, and left it in the file without comment, the way Marcus handled all information he didn't yet have context for. Roman had the context. What Roman didn't have was certainty about what it meant. It could mean Harlow was alive and had been operating in the shadows for 3 years, using Daniel Cross as a vehicle to move money through Roman's own network. A slow, patient piece of sabotage designed to compromise the operation from within before anyone noticed. That would mean the Tucson fire, the dental records, the whole architecture of the declared death had been constructed, either by Harlow or for Harlow. Either way, with federal cooperation that Roman had paid for and believed. Or it could mean someone was using Harlow's identity posthumously. A name with no living owner was useful in exactly this way. It could sign documents, anchor shell companies, absorb liability. If someone knew enough about Harlow's background to construct a credible paper identity, they could operate under it indefinitely. Both possibilities were bad. The second possibility was, in some ways, worse. Because it meant someone who knew about Harlow, knew enough to weaponize the identity, was operating close enough to Roman's world to understand what that name would and wouldn't trigger in his security systems. Roman closed the file. He needed to move carefully. He needed more information before he told anyone what he had found, including Garrett, including Marcus, because until he understood the shape of this, he couldn't be certain which parts of his own organization were compromised. That was the particular nausea of discovering that your information was wrong. It didn't just invalidate the specific piece. It threw everything connected to it into question. He picked up the phone and called a number that wasn't saved in any contact list. It rang 4 times. "Yeah." A man's voice, rough, awake despite the hour. "I need to meet," Roman said. "Tonight." A pause. "That's not how this works." "I know how it works. I'm telling you it doesn't work that way tonight." Another pause. Longer. 1 hour. The usual place. Roman was already standing. The usual place was a diner in Greenpoint that had been open since 1987 and served coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since 1987 and had a back booth that couldn't be seen from the street and whose owner had benefited from Roman's financial assistance during a licensing dispute 6 years ago and understood that some customers required privacy as a condition of their patronage. The man in the back booth was named DeLuca. He was 53, heavy-set, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent 30 years in federal law enforcement and retired into the specific kind of private consulting that federal law enforcement preferred not to examine too closely. He and Roman had an arrangement that was mutually uncomfortable and mutually necessary and had been in place for 8 years. Roman slid into the booth across from him. DeLuca looked at his face. "How bad?" DeLuca said. Roman put a photograph on the table. It was a printout of the signature page from the Delaware LLC registration, the page with Harlow's name on it. DeLuca looked at it. Something moved behind his eyes that Roman cataloged without being able to fully interpret. "Where did you get this?" DeLuca said. "From my own records. Buried in a shell my team pulled apart last night." Roman kept his voice level. "Explain it to me." DeLuca didn't touch the photograph. He looked at it from a distance of about 8 inches, like he was trying to read it without being associated with having read it. "I can't explain it," he said. "Can't or won't?" "Both." DeLuca picked up his coffee, put it down without drinking. "The death declaration was clean. I vouched for it personally. The marshals who were present are people I've worked with for 20 years. Then why is his name on a document dated 14 months ago?" "I don't know." DeLuca. "I don't know." He said it harder this time. "You think I'd sit here and look you in the eye if I'd played you on this? You know what happens to people who play you." Roman looked at him for a long time. DeLuca was frightened. Not performing frightened, actually frightened, the specific physiological version, the slight pallor around the mouth, and the way his right hand had gone flat on the table. This was a man processing something that compromised his own assumptions. "There's another possibility," Roman said. DeLuca looked at him. "The records were real. The death was real. And someone is using his identity without knowing or caring that we'd be able to trace it." DeLuca was quiet for a moment. "Meaning someone who had access to Harlow before he died. Documents, account information, background material. Enough to construct a functional identity, yes. That's a very short list of people. Give me the list." "Roman, give me the list, DeLuca." The diner was empty except for a night shift cook somewhere in the back and a college student asleep over a textbook at the counter. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere outside, a truck was backing up, its alarm a slow, patient beep in the wet dark. DeLuca leaned forward. "If I give you names and you move on those names and it comes back that I was the source, it won't come back. You can't guarantee us." "I just did." Roman's voice hadn't risen. It never rose. "I'm not asking you to move. I'm asking you to tell me who had access to Harlow's documentation during and after the relocation process." DeLuca rubbed his face with both hands. When he dropped them, he looked 10 years older. 4 people handled the identity construction. 2 marshals, Henderson and Kraft, both retired now. a documentation specialist named Okafor who's been out of federal service for 18 months. And he stopped. And a private contractor who assisted with the financial architecture. The shell accounts Harlow used in witness protection. Someone had to build those cleanly enough that they wouldn't be traced back to the program. Roman waited. His name was Callum Reese, DeLuca said. He worked for a financial consulting group out of Jersey City. Legitimate operation mostly, but they did contract work for federal programs that required discretion. Past tense. The consulting group dissolved about 2 years ago. DeLuca paused. Reese went independent. Roman sat with that for a moment. Find me Reese, he said. Roman, if Reese built the architecture and then went independent, the people he might be working for now. Find me Reese. DeLuca looked at him, then nodded once, the way a man nods when he's accepted that the situation has moved past the point where his comfort level is a relevant variable. Roman left $40 on the table and walked out into the rain. He was back at Blackthorn by 2 in the morning. He did not sleep. At 7:45 the following morning, Evelyn arrived to find a new phone on her desk. Boxed, already activated, a handwritten note from Kieran attached with the new number and instructions for the 2-step security setup. She held it for a moment, then picked up her old phone, powered it down, and put it in her desk drawer without looking at the screen. She told herself this was practical. She did not examine whether it was also something else. Roman came out of his suite at 8:15 and stopped at her desk with his jacket already on and 2 things in his hand, her morning schedule printout and a sealed envelope. The envelope goes to Rahi in legal, he said, handing her both. By hand, not internal mail. All right? She took them, looked at his face. He looked like a man who had been awake since yesterday, but had decided that information was not available for public consumption. Did you sleep? He looked at her briefly. Enough. She felt the echo of her own words from yesterday, and something in her chest shifted. You found something else, she said. Beyond Daniel. A pause. We'll talk at 10, he said. After Ree. She nodded. He moved toward the elevator. She watched him go with the particular feeling of standing at the edge of something whose full dimensions she couldn't yet see. Ree was on the 31st floor in the legal compliance suite. He was a small, meticulous Korean-American man in his early 50s who read documents the way surgeons read scans, with the complete absorption of someone who understood that the details were where the danger lived. He looked at the envelope Evelyn handed him, looked at the seal, and looked at her. Wait here, he said. She waited. 12 minutes later, he came back and handed her a sealed return envelope. For Mr. Vescari, he said. By hand. She was back on 47 by 940. Roman was on the phone when she came in, standing at the window, turned away, his voice low enough that she couldn't hear the words. He raised one hand when he saw her. 5 minutes. She sat at her desk and worked on the distribution calendar and tried not to watch the reflection of his face in the glass. He finished the call at 9:58. He sat down across from her, not at his own desk, but in the chair on the opposite side of hers, the client chair, which put them at eye level and removed the architectural hierarchy of the desk between them. She noticed this. Tell me what you know about Daniel's work, he said. Specifically, who he reports to at Meridian, whether he's mentioned outside clients, whether he ever talked about his other financial activities. Evelyn thought. He reports to someone named Garrett Foss, senior partner. I met him once at a firm dinner. She stopped. He knew things about me that Daniel shouldn't have told him. Personal things. I remember thinking it was strange. Roman wrote the name down. Other clients, Daniel talked about his portfolio clients sometimes, but never by name. He was careful about that, professionally careful. She paused. There was one name he mentioned once. He stopped himself mid-sentence, which he never did. He covered it by changing the subject. The name. Reese, he said something like, Reese wants the quarterly, and then stopped and looked at me and finished differently. She watched Roman's face. Does that mean something to you? Roman's pen had stopped moving. He was looking at the notepad in front of him with the complete stillness of a man who has just heard 2 separate pieces of information connect. Roman. He looked up. What is it? She said. He put the pen down. Callum Reese is the name of a financial architect who built shell structures for a former associate of mine, someone I believed was dead. He said it carefully, evenly, without the words performing more than they needed to. If Daniel is in contact with Reese, it means this is not an opportunistic situation. Someone built this. Someone identified the vulnerability in my distribution network, identified the contractor relationship, and inserted Daniel Cross into your life deliberately. The silence that followed was absolute. Evelyn heard it land, felt it land, the specific horror of it. Not just the abuse, not just the years of systematic destruction, but the possibility that her entry into Daniel's life had not been accident or chemistry or bad luck. That someone had looked at her resume, at her professional history, at the fact that she was applying to positions in Roman's subsidiary network, and had made a calculation. "You think he was placed," she said. The words felt like something being cut out of her. "I think it's possible. You think someone told him to find me, to be with me, so that when I eventually—" She stopped. Her voice had done something she hadn't given it permission to do. "Evelyn." "Don't." She held up one hand. "Just give me a second." He gave her the second. She pressed both hands flat on the desk surface. The cool of it was grounding. She focused on that. 3 years. 3 years of being afraid every morning when she heard his key in the lock. 3 years of calibrating her words and her tone and the angle of her body in a room. 3 years of bruises and explanations and the particular loneliness of having something happen to you that you couldn't describe to anyone without seeing the thing in their eyes that meant they were calculating how much of it was your fault. And possibly, she had been selected for it. "Does it change anything," Roman said quietly, "about what happened to you? Does it make it different?" She looked at him. "No," she said, and meant it. "He still chose to do it." "Yes," Roman said. "He did." A beat. "But it means the threat architecture is different," she said. She was pulling herself back into the practical with both hands, because the practical was survivable and the other thing wasn't. Not right now. It means whoever is behind this knows I'm here, knows I'm connected to you now. Yes. And if Daniel panics, he'll make contact with Reese, which is what I'm counting on. Roman's voice had shifted into something harder and more precise. I have surveillance on Cross starting from last night. The moment he makes contact with Reese or anyone connected to this, I'll know. What about the Colton freight audit? In progress. I'll have names by this afternoon. And the people at Colton who cooperated with him. Roman looked at her. They'll be dealt with, he said simply. She absorbed the flatness of that. In another context, at another time in her life, she might have found it frightening. Right now she found it almost comforting, which told her something about what 3 years with Daniel Cross had done to her relationship with the concept of consequences. There's something else, Roman said. She waited. The Moretti name appears in Harlow's background. The associate I mentioned, Harlow, had a prior connection to the Moretti organization. Before he worked for me. He paused. If Reese is connected to Harlow's network and Harlow is connected to the Morettis, the money moving through Colton Freight isn't just financial sabotage. It's infrastructure. Someone has been building a case for leverage. Leverage against you. Against my operation. Against my network. He was quiet for a moment. I've been at war with the Moretti syndicate for 11 years. They've never been able to touch the core operation because they've never had visibility inside it. If someone has been building that visibility for 18 months, he stopped. The implications arranged themselves in the air between them like a structure being assembled piece by piece. You need to move, Evelyn said, before they're ready. Roman looked at her. There was something in his expression, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. She had arrived at the same tactical conclusion he had, and she had arrived there in about 30 seconds. Yes, he said. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face went still in a way that was different from his usual controlled stillness. This was the stillness of something arriving ahead of schedule. He answered. What? Evelyn watched his face. She watched something move through it that she had never seen there before. It was fast, Less than 2 seconds. And then it was gone, locked down behind the professional architecture he wore like a second skin. But she had been looking directly at him, and she had been trained by 3 years of reading a man's face for danger, and she saw it. Fear. Not for himself. Something worse than that. He lowered the phone. Daniel Cross entered your building, he said, 20 minutes ago. He told your neighbor he was picking up his belongings. He stood. He has a key. Evelyn was on her feet before she consciously decided to stand. My building has, the super doesn't... Marcus is already en route. Roman was moving toward the door. Your neighbor called the building manager. By the time Marcus arrives, Cross will either be gone or... His phone buzzed again. He stopped, read the screen. His jaw set. He's not there for belongings, Roman said. What do you mean? Roman turned the phone so she could see the screen. It was a message from Marcus. 3 words and an image attachment. The 3 words were, check your email. Evelyn pulled up her new phone with hands that were not quite steady. Her new email account had one message, sent 11 minutes ago from an address she didn't recognize. She opened it. There were photographs, 6 of them. They had been taken through her apartment windows. The street-facing ones, the ones she had thought about that first night in the car, the ones she had told herself she was being paranoid to worry about. They showed her inside her apartment, getting dressed. The dates and times stamped in the corner of each image were spread across the last 4 days. The message below the photographs contained 4 sentences. I know where you are now. I know who you're with. You think he can protect you, but he can't protect you from what's already inside his walls. Tell him Vincent says hello. Evelyn's hands had gone completely still. She read the last sentence again. Then she looked up at Roman. He had read it over her shoulder. She knew because of the quality of the silence that came out of him. Not the controlled silence, not the professional silence, but something older and more elemental. The silence of a man standing at the edge of something he had... Roman put the phone down on the desk with the particular care of a man who understood that the alternative was putting it through the window. Tell him Vincent says hello. He stood with his back to Evelyn for 4 seconds. She counted them. His shoulders were absolutely still. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of something under enormous compression, the way a cable goes rigid just before it snaps. She could see the line of his jaw from the side and the way the muscle there had locked into something that looked like it hurt. Then he turned around. Whatever she had expected, rage, movement, the controlled explosion she had been bracing for. It wasn't this. His face had gone somewhere else entirely, past anger, past the operational calculation she was used to seeing. He looked like a man who had just watched a wall he built with his own hands get knocked flat, and was now doing the arithmetic of what had been standing behind it. Get your bag, he said. Roman? Now, Evelyn. She got her bag. He was already on the phone before she had the strap on her shoulder, moving through the suite door and down the hall with the long, purposeful stride of a man who had decided that all the careful and deliberate and measured approaches of the last 48 hours were finished. Marcus, where are you? He listened. Leave it. Pull back and get to the tower. I need everyone inside in the next 20 minutes. A pause. Because the timeline just changed. Because Harlow is alive and he's been inside our walls and he just told us so. Another pause, shorter. I know what I said. Bring Garrett. Bring Ree. Nobody else until I know who's clean. He ended the call. The elevator arrived and they stepped in. Evelyn stood beside him and watched the floor numbers descend and tried to organize the inside of her head into something functional. He's been watching my apartment, she said. Yes. For at least 4 days, probably longer. Yes. The photographs. He sent them from an address I didn't recognize. Burner. It's already pulled. Roman's voice was flat and fast. The photos were taken from street level. Telephoto. He had someone stationed outside your building or he did it himself. If he had someone stationed, then he has resources, which means this isn't Daniel acting alone out of jealousy. He looked at the floor indicator. Daniel doesn't have the operational capability to surveil an apartment, build a shell company structure, and insert himself into a federal witness protection paper trail. He was a vehicle, a tool someone gave purpose and direction. Harlow. Or Harlow's people, or whoever is using Harlow's name. He exhaled once. It doesn't matter which, until I have him in front of me. The elevator reached the parking level. Roman's car was already running. The driver, a man named Teo, who had been with Roman for 7 years and had the specific quality of someone who had seen enough to never be surprised, pulled smoothly out before the door was fully closed. 47, Roman said. Fast. Teo went fast. Evelyn pressed her back into the seat and looked at the concrete pillars strobing past the windows and said, "The message said he's already inside your walls." "I know. That means someone in your organization, someone with access." "I know. You don't know who." "Not yet." His jaw was tight. "That's what the next hour is for." "And if it's someone close, Garrett? Rahi?" Roman looked at her sideways. "Then I'll deal with it." The flatness of that landed like a stone in still water. "You've known Garrett for how long?" 12 years. "And if it's him?" Roman was quiet for 3 seconds. "Then I've known him for 12 years, and he spent some part of that time looking for a way to sell me to my oldest enemy." He looked back at the windshield. "And I'll deal with it." She believed him. That was the thing. She believed it completely, without a flicker of doubt. And she wasn't sure what that said about her, or about him, or about the particular gravity field she had been pulled into over the last 72 hours. They went back upstairs. The 47th floor conference room filled up in 11 minutes. Garrett came in first, already in his coat, face arranged in the professional alertness of a man called in from outside. Then Rahi, immaculate despite the hour, carrying his phone and a leather notepad. Then 3 of Roman's security directors, Vasquez, Kim, and a man everyone called Brower, whose actual first name Evelyn had not yet learned. Then Marcus, last, who looked at Roman when he entered with an expression that communicated several things simultaneously. Evelyn sat at the far end of the table. Roman had not told her to leave. She had not asked whether she should. Roman stood at the head of the table and did not sit down. "Vincent Harlow is alive," he said. The room received this differently person by person. Garrett went very still. Rhee's pen stopped moving. Vasquez looked at the table. Kim looked at Roman. Brower showed nothing, which was his default, and therefore not informative. Marcus showed nothing either, but his eyes moved across the room in the specific way of a man cataloging reactions. "I have documentation placing his identity in the shell structure used by Daniel Cross," Roman continued. "I have confirmation from a federal source that the death declaration was either falsified or compromised post-execution, and I have a message sent to my assistant's new email address, an address established less than 12 hours ago, that references Harlow by name." He paused. "That message was sent to a device and account that did not exist yesterday morning, which means whoever sent it had access to information generated inside this building within the last 24 hours. The silence was a different quality now. It had texture. "I'm going to say this once," Roman said. "If anyone at this table has information about Harlow, about Reese, about the Colton freight operation, or about the surveillance conducted on Ms. Mercer's residence, you tell me now. What happens in the next 10 minutes is survivable. What happens after I find out another way is not." Nobody spoke. Roman looked at each face in turn. He spent slightly longer on some than others. Evelyn watched him do it and tried to read what he saw and couldn't. "All right," he said. "Garrett, I need the Colton freight audit completed and on this table in 2 hours. Every transaction, every authorized contact, every personnel file for anyone who touched that contractor relationship." Garrett nodded once. "I'll need whatever you need. Take it." Roman moved on. "Marcus, I want Cross located, not approached. Located. I want to know where he is in the next 30 minutes. "Already running," Marcus said. "Rahi, the email account that sent those photographs, whatever you need legally to accelerate, trace, and identify, prepare it. I don't care about judicial timeline. I care about tonight." Ari wrote something, nodded. "Vasquez, I want the building's internal communication logs from the last 24 hours. Every email, every internal message, every access card swipe on 47. Everything." Vasquez straightened. "Full floor?" "Full floor." A beat. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. Everyone's access log, including everyone in this room. Garrett's jaw tightened. Roman, if you're suggesting that someone at this table— I'm not suggesting anything, Roman said. I'm collecting information. If your log is clean, you have nothing to be concerned about. Garrett held the look for 1 second longer than comfortable. Then he nodded. The meeting broke apart into motion. Evelyn stayed in her seat while the room emptied around her. Marcus was last out again, and he paused at the door and looked at Roman with a question he didn't ask out loud. Stay on the building, Roman said. Marcus left. Roman and Evelyn were alone. He sat down for the first time since she'd seen him this morning, not at the head of the table, but in the chair beside her, 2 seats down, with the particular exhaustion of a man who has been holding a structural position for a long time and is allowing himself one moment of not holding it. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask. In the 3 years with Daniel, did he ever ask you specific questions about work, about the companies you worked for, the people you reported to, the internal structures? Evelyn thought. Really thought. Not the reflexive no that came from the instinct to minimize, but the actual archaeological work of going back through years of conversations. Yes, she said slowly. Not obviously. He was careful about it. He'd ask in a way that looked like interest, like he was engaged in my work. She paused. About 8 months ago, I was applying for a transfer within the Aldgate subsidiary network. He saw the application on my laptop. He was angry, ostensibly because he hadn't known I was looking for a new position. Her face changed slightly. But he got very specific about which subsidiaries I was applying to. He pushed me toward Blackthorn. I thought it was because the salary was better. Roman was listening with absolute attention. He told me Blackthorn would be good for my career, she said. He did research on it, showed me the organizational structure, helped me with the application. She stopped. He helped me with the application. The weight of that sat between them. He placed you, Roman said quietly. He placed you himself. Evelyn's throat worked. Yes. That means he knew about Blackthorn before you applied. He knew about the subsidiary relationship. He knew— Roman stopped. He knew you, Evelyn said. He knew who you were and what your organization was, and he put me here on purpose. She said it without her voice breaking. She wasn't sure how. Roman looked at her face and she looked back at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. And the silence was the particular kind that exists between two people who have simultaneously understood something terrible and are sitting with it together because there is no other option. He used you, Roman said. Not apologetically, not gently, just accurately. Yes. For 3 years he built a cover that put him close to information about my operation, and when the time came he maneuvered you into direct access. Yes. And he hurt you in the process. His voice had gone somewhere low and very controlled. Not as a side effect, as part of the mechanism. A woman with bruises and a dependent psychology and no support network doesn't ask questions, doesn't look too closely, doesn't have the resources to be a liability. Evelyn pressed both palms flat on the table. I need you to stop, she said. Evelyn, I know. I know all of that. I've been sitting here knowing it for the last 20 minutes, and if you keep saying it out loud, I'm going to fall apart in your conference room, and I cannot afford to do that right now. She looked at him directly. So please stop. He stopped. She breathed. He waited. What do you need from me? She said. Specifically, right now. He looked at her for a moment. The assessment in his gaze was different from the first night. Less urgent, more complete. He had been looking at her in pieces up until now. He was looking at the whole of her. Nothing right now, he said. I need you to stay in the building. I need you to use only the new phone, and I need you to tell me immediately if you receive any further communication from any address you don't recognize. And Daniel is going to make a move in the next few hours, Roman said. He sent those photographs because he wants to demonstrate capability. He wants me afraid or reactive. He wants me to move before I'm ready. His voice was steady and cold. I'm not going to do that. What are you going to do? I'm going to let him think he has the initiative. Roman stood. And then I'm going to take it from him. The next 2 hours moved in the particular way that hours move when everything is in motion and none of it is visible yet, fast and airless, with the quality of falling. The Colton freight audit came back at 2:30. Garrett brought it in person, carrying a physical file rather than sending it digitally, which told Roman something about how Garrett had interpreted the morning's proceedings. He set it on the desk and stood back while Roman read. The audit was 12 pages. Roman read it in 6 minutes. When he finished, he looked up at Garrett. "Page 9, Roman said. "The authorized contact log. Third entry from the bottom." Garrett had clearly already found it. His face was doing something careful. Marcus Tane. Marcus authorized a communication channel to the Colton Freight Operations Manager 14 months ago. Roman's voice was completely even. An out-of-protocol channel, direct. Not logged in the standard system. It appears in the Colton records, but not in our internal communications database. Garrett said nothing. Which means either Marcus created a shadow channel deliberately, Roman said, or someone used his credentials to create it without his knowledge. Those are very different scenarios, Garrett said carefully. Yes, Roman closed the file. They are. Garrett read his face. Do you want me to? No. I'll handle Marcus myself. He stood. Where is he? Building perimeter, east side. Roman came around the desk. He walked through the suite, through the outer office where Evelyn looked up at him and read something in his face and stood, and through the hallway to the elevator bank, and Garrett followed at a distance that was tactful. Marcus was in the lobby when they came down. He was standing near the security desk talking to Fowler, and when the elevator opened and Roman came out, Marcus turned with the unhurried ease of a man with a clean conscience, and Roman looked at him across 30 feet of marble lobby and felt the specific nausea of knowing something you didn't want to know. Marcus's eyes moved to the file under Roman's arm. Something shifted in his face. Barely. Almost nothing. But Roman had known Marcus for 9 years. Walk with me, Roman said. They went to the private security office off the main lobby, a room with no windows and a single table and 2 chairs and a camera in the corner that Marcus himself had installed 4 years ago. Roman did not look at the camera when they went in. He sat down across from Marcus and put the file on the table. Marcus sat. His hands were relaxed on the table surface. His face was arranged in the attentive neutrality of someone waiting for information. Page 9, Roman said. Marcus looked at the file. Didn't open it. Colton Freight, Roman said. 14 months ago. Your credentials authorized a direct communication channel to their operations manager. Out of protocol, not logged. Marcus was quiet. I need you to explain that to me, Roman said. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Then Marcus said, I can't. You can't or you won't. I can't explain it in a way that comes out well for me. His voice was level, steady. The voice of a man who had decided before entering this conversation what the shape of it would be. So I'm not going to insult you by trying. The room felt very small. How long? Roman said. 14 months. That's accurate. Harlow. A man who said he represented Harlow's interests. I never met Harlow directly. A pause. I was told Harlow was alive. I was told that you had known and had concealed it, and that the people around you were going to be held responsible for the concealment when it came out. He stopped. I was told that cooperating was the safer position. Roman looked at him. You believed that. I believed enough of it. Marcus met his eyes. I'm not going to tell you I was coerced. I made a choice. I thought I was managing risk. What did you give them? Communication channels, access architecture, nothing operational, no personnel, no routes, no... The new phone, Roman said. Evelyn's new phone, the new account, the number. Marcus closed his eyes. 1 second, 2. Opened them. I logged the account setup, he said quietly. Standard procedure. It would have been in the internal system. Which you had a shadow channel into. Yes. Roman sat very still. 9 years. Evelyn Mercer's new phone number had been in the system for less than 12 hours, long enough for Marcus to log it through his standard duties. long enough for that log to travel through a channel he had opened into the dark, to Reese, to Harlow, to whoever was holding the other end of the string. Long enough for a message to arrive on her new phone, telling her that no walls were thick enough. Roman stood. He looked at Marcus for a long moment. This man who had stood outside rooms and driven cars and managed security protocols and stood in elevator lobbies and said, "They're not here for you," and felt the particular grief of betrayal that had nothing to do with softness and everything to do with what it cost to trust someone for 9 years. "Stand up," Roman said. Marcus stood. "Give me your phone, both of them." Marcus reached into his jacket and produced 2 phones and placed them on the table. Roman looked at Garrett, who had been standing in the doorway. "Take him downstairs. Keep him contained. Nobody talks to him until I say." Garrett nodded and stepped forward, and Marcus went without resistance, without drama, without a word. The specific dignity of a man who knew he had no grounds for protest and had decided not to waste anyone's time with one. The door closed. Roman stood alone in the security office for 30 seconds. Then his own phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. The same number architecture as the email sent to Evelyn. 4 words. "Bring her to me." Roman's hand tightened on the phone until the knuckles went pale. Then it buzzed again. Same number. An address. A location on the waterfront. A terminal number. And then a third message, arriving 15 seconds after the second, which Roman read and read again because the first reading didn't fully penetrate. It was a photograph. Evelyn. From the security camera feed in the 47th floor reception area. Timestamp 14 minutes ago. She was at her desk, in the building exactly where Roman had left her. Beside her in the photograph, half visible at the edge of the frame, standing near the window with his back to the camera, was a man Roman had not authorized to be on that floor. Roman was already moving before the thought finished forming. He hit the stairwell at a run, taking the stairs 2 at a time upward, 32 floors of concrete and steel between him and the 47th, his hand hitting the rail at each landing to redirect momentum, his breath coming hard and deliberate, not panicked. He would not be panicked. Panic cost you the half second that he hit the 38th floor landing and his lungs were burning and he didn't slow down. 39. 40. The stairwell was concrete and fluorescent light and the sound of his own breathing echoing off surfaces that didn't care. His hand hit the rail at 41 and he used it to redirect around the turn without losing momentum and kept climbing. His mind was doing 2 things simultaneously, running the tactical arithmetic of what he would find and suppressing the part of him that was not tactical at all, the part that had looked at a photograph of a man standing near Evelyn's desk and felt something that had no place in the next 4 minutes. 44. 45. He could hear something above him now, not voices, not yet, a sound he couldn't categorize from this distance. 46. He hit the 47th floor door with his shoulder and came through it fast and low and had his hand at his side where the gun was before the door had finished opening. The reception area was empty. Not empty like end of day empty. Empty like something had moved through it. Kieran's chair was pushed back at a wrong angle. A coffee cup was on the floor near the desk, liquid still spreading in a slow dark crescent across the pale tile. The monitor on Evelyn's desk was still lit, a document open, cursor blinking, the specific tableau of a desk vacated without intention. Roman stood in the doorway and took in the room in 1 second. Then he heard it. From inside his suite, through the closed door. 2 voices. One of them hers, tight and controlled. One of them a man's voice he did not recognize, which meant it was not Daniel, which changed the geometry of the situation in a way he processed in the time it took him to cross the reception area. He did not announce himself. He opened the door. The man standing near the window was in his late 50s, heavy-set, but not soft, with the particular build of someone who had been physically capable once and had maintained enough of it to remain dangerous. He had gray hair cut close and the kind of face that looked like it had been through several rearrangements over the years. Nose broken at least twice, a scar along the left jaw that pulled the skin slightly. He was wearing a dark overcoat that was wet at the shoulders. He had one hand on Evelyn's arm. Not gripping, not yet, but positioned. The way you position a hand when you want someone to understand that gripping is available to you. Evelyn was standing very still. Her face was doing the thing Roman had seen on the first night. The calibrated neutrality of someone who had learned that stillness was safer than reaction. But her eyes had moved to Roman the instant the door opened, and what was in them was not calm. It was the concentrated effort of someone holding themselves together through an act of will. The man looked at Roman without surprise. "You came up the stairs," he said. "I expected the elevator." "Who are you?" Roman said. "You know who I am." Roman looked at him. "Reese. Callum Reese." He said it with the faint satisfaction of a man being recognized at a level that cost something. "Took you longer than I expected to find the name. DeLuca spoke more highly of your intelligence." "Take your hand off her." Reese looked down at his hand on Evelyn's arm as if he had forgotten it was there. He didn't move it. Roman's gun was out. The movement had been fast and completely without theater. One moment his hand was at his side, the next the gun was level, and his feet were set, and there was nothing in his face that suggested this was a demonstration. Reese looked at the gun, looked at Roman's face. Whatever he found there made a small calculation happen behind his eyes. He took his hand off Evelyn's arm. She moved sideways. Not running, controlled lateral distance, 3 steps to her right, putting the couch between herself and Reese without being asked and without breaking line of sight with Roman. Tactical. Good. "Harlow," Roman said. Where is he?" "Not here," Reese said. "He doesn't do field work anymore. He prefers to delegate." "Where?" "That depends on how this conversation goes." Roman's gun didn't move. "This isn't a conversation. You're going to tell me where Harlow is, you're going to tell me who else in my organization you have access to beyond Marcus, and you're going to explain to me why I should let you walk out of this building rather than go out the window." Reese looked at the window. 47 floors. The city below, lit and indifferent. "Because I'm the only person who can give you Harlow," he said. "I'll find Harlow without you." "Maybe. But not before tonight." Reese put his hands in his overcoat pockets, slowly watching Roman track the movement. Empty pockets, a man making himself readable. "He's moving. The Colton freight audit going active triggered a contingency. By midnight, he'll be in a location that takes you 6 months to find, if you find it at all." He paused. "I'm here because I want to make a different arrangement." "You broke into my building," Roman said. "You put your hands on my assistant. I needed your attention undivided." Reese's voice was steady, almost reasonable. "I have it. You have about 40 seconds before I stop being interested in what you have to say." "Harlow has documentation," Reese said. 3 years of operational intelligence on your distribution network, your financial architecture, your personnel. Everything I built for him over 18 months running through your own contractor. He has enough to take to the Moretti Syndicate and sell your entire infrastructure for whatever they're willing to pay." He paused. "Which is considerable. They've been waiting for exactly this." Roman said nothing. "The alternative," Reese continued, "is that Harlow disappears. Not a fake disappearance this time, a real one. All the documentation disappears with him, the shell structures dissolve. Daniel Cross becomes a man with a fraud conviction and nothing else." He tilted his head slightly. "In exchange for that outcome, I want passage, out of the country, clean papers, access to the 2 accounts Harlow controls that he doesn't know I have visibility into." "You're selling him," Roman said. "I'm managing my retirement." "Why?" Reese was quiet for a moment. The first moment of genuine quiet, the kind where something true was being decided rather than performed. "Because I built those structures for a man I thought had a coherent plan. And what I found out 6 months ago is that his plan ends with this city burning and he doesn't care who's in it." He looked at Roman directly. "I care who's in it. I have a daughter in Brooklyn. I want to not be in the country when what's left of Harlow's operation lands on the Moretti organization's radar. And I want the 2 accounts that are mine by any honest accounting of the work I've done. And if I say no, then I walk out of here and Harlow makes contact with Moretti tonight, and you spend the next 18 months fighting a war on 3 fronts while your financial architecture gets dismantled from the outside." He paused. "And Ms. Mercer remains a liability that both sides will want to resolve." The word liability landed in the room like something physical. Evelyn didn't react. She was standing by the couch with her arms at her sides and her face composed, and Roman could see in his peripheral vision that her hands were flat against her thighs and very still. He looked at Reese. "The accounts," Roman said. "What's in them?" "Combined, about 2.3 million. Legitimately mine. I can document the work history." "The documentation on my network. How is it stored?" "Encrypted server. Harlow has the primary key. I have the secondary. Without both keys, the data is inaccessible." "And you'd give me the secondary key." "In exchange for what I asked. Where's Harlow tonight?" A pause. "I need your word first," Reese said. Roman lowered the gun. Not all the way. To chest level, no longer aimed. A partial concession that was also a question. "My word means something because I keep it," Roman said, "which means I'm precise about what I give it for." He looked at Reese. "I'll give you passage, clean papers, whatever time you need. I will not come after you, and I will not allow what you've told me tonight to determine your safety going forward." "The accounts." "The accounts are yours, if they're yours. I'm not in the business of taking what doesn't belong to me." Reese looked at him for a long moment. "Harlow is at a property in Red Hook," he said. "Industrial block on the water. He uses it as a staging point, has for years. The address is in my phone." He reached slowly into his inside pocket and produced a phone and held it out. Roman crossed the room and took it. He looked at the screen. An address. A pier number. He looked at Reese. "Secondary key. When I'm out." "When Harlow is contained," Roman said. "Not before." Reese absorbed that, nodded once. Roman pressed the intercom on his desk. "Garrett, I need 4 men at my suite now, armed." He looked at Reese. "And someone bring Marcus up from downstairs." He ended the intercom. He looked at Evelyn. She was looking back at him. Her face was doing something complicated. Not falling apart, not performed composure, but the real thing, the difficult equilibrium of someone holding two contradictory states at once. She had been used as leverage twice in the last 10 minutes, and she was still standing and her eyes were clear. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." "He touched your arm." "I'm not hurt." She held his gaze. "Go. Do what you have to do. I'll be here." He held her gaze for 1 second longer than necessary. Then he went. Red Hook at 11 at night was wet concrete and river smell and the specific darkness of industrial waterfront. Not the ambient darkness of residential streets, but the deliberate darkness of places that didn't want to be seen. The piers extended into the black water, and the lights of lower Manhattan were a smear of orange and white on the far side of the river, close enough to see, far enough to be another world. Roman went in with 5 men. He would have preferred more. He used 5 because 5 was what he had on 30 minutes' notice, and he wasn't willing to wait for more because Harlow had contingencies, and contingencies were triggered by time. The building at the address Reese had given was a converted warehouse. 3 stories, steel and old brick, with loading bays on the ground floor that faced the water. 1 vehicle outside. Lights on the second floor visible through covered windows as thin lines of yellow at the edges. Garrett had tactical command on the exterior. Roman took the interior. They went in through the loading bay, which was unlocked, either careless or intentional, and Roman moved through it assuming intentional, assuming Harlow had some visibility on approach, assuming the first 30 seconds inside were the most dangerous. Ground floor was clear, storage mostly, old equipment, the smell of river water and machine oil. The stairs were metal, and Roman took them fast and quiet and came up into a corridor that ran the length of the building. 2 men at the far end of the corridor, both armed. Both saw him at the same time he saw them. The next 8 seconds were very loud and very fast, and Roman moved through them with the specific economy of a man who had trained for this and hated that he had to use the training but was grateful he had it, coming up on the near side of a structural column and firing twice, and hearing the return fire go wide and high, and then the corridor was quiet. He kept moving. The room at the end of the corridor had a steel door that was ajar. Roman pushed it open with his foot. Vincent Harlow was sitting at a table with a laptop in front of him and a phone in his hand, and the specific expression of a man who had heard the corridor and made his calculations and arrived somewhere past panic into a cold and functional place. He was 61 years old, thin. He had always been thin. It was one of the things Roman remembered, the leanness of him, the way he looked like he had been stripped to the essential components. White hair, eyes that were very pale and very alert. He looked at Roman. "You're faster than I planned for," he said. "You planned poorly," Roman said. Harlow looked at the gun in Roman's hand. "Are you going to shoot me?" "I haven't decided." "Then let me say something first. You have about 90 seconds before my people come through the exterior doors, and the decision gets more complicated." Harlow put the phone face down on the table. He folded his hands on top of it. The gesture was almost professorial. "I want you to understand that nothing I did was personal." "The woman," Roman said, "you targeted a specific woman, and you put a man in her life who spent 3 years hurting her systematically. You tell me what part of that wasn't personal?" Harlow was quiet for a moment. Cross was supposed to be a clean operation, an information vehicle. What he did to her privately was not what? Your business? Roman's voice had gone somewhere very flat and very cold. "You put a violent man in a woman's life and called it an operation. You don't get to separate those things." Harlow looked at him. "You were supposed to be a rational actor," Harlow said. "You were supposed to prioritize the operational threat over the personal one. That's always been your pattern." He paused. "The girl was supposed to be irrelevant to you. You were wrong." "Clearly." He looked at Roman's face. "She matters to you. She works for me. That's not why she matters to you." Roman said nothing. Harlow looked at him for a long moment. "You know what I thought when I found out you'd brought her inside the building, protected her, moved her desk, had Marcus watching her?" He tilted his head slightly. "I thought, after all this time, after everything he built, this is the thing that breaks his pattern. A woman he met 3 days ago." "Shut up," Roman said. "I'm not saying it as an insult. I'm saying it as an observation. You've been alone inside that operation for 20 years, running everything, trusting almost nobody, and something about her—" "I said shut up." Harlow did. The sound of boots on the metal stairs. Garrett's team coming up from the exterior. Roman looked at Harlow, at the laptop, at the phone face down on the table. "The server," he said. "The documentation. Where?" Harlow looked at him. "You spoke to Reese." "Where?" A pause. "It doesn't matter. Without the secondary key, the data is unusable. Reese has the secondary key." "I know he does." Harlow absorbed that, processed the implication. "He's already gone." "He will be." Something moved across Harlow's face. Not quite betrayal. He was past the capacity for surprise at betrayal. More like the tired recognition of a pattern he had seen before and should have anticipated. "He told you everything." "Enough." The door behind Roman opened. Garrett came through with 2 men and stopped, reading the room. Roman looked at Harlow one more time, at the pale eyes and the folded hands and the 61 years of patient malice dressed up as operational logic. "You told me nothing I did was personal," Roman said. "So I want you to understand that what happens next isn't personal either." He stepped back. He let Garrett handle the rest. He walked back down the corridor and down the metal stairs and out through the loading bay into the cold, wet air of the waterfront and stood at the edge of the pier, looking at the black water and the orange smear of Manhattan on the other side of the river. His hands were steady. He had expected them to shake. They didn't. He stood there until Garrett came out and said, "It's done." And Roman nodded and said, "The laptop and the phone. I want them in our hands before we leave." "Already taken," Garrett said. "And the server address." "Reese's secondary key arrived 20 minutes ago. Our tech team is accessing and wiping as of right now." Roman looked at the water. "Daniel Cross. In custody. Federal, as of 2 hours ago. Rishi coordinated with DeLuca. The fraud documentation was enough for an immediate warrant. He'll be processed tonight." Garrett paused. "He tried to run, didn't get far." Roman said nothing. "The Moretti connection," Garrett continued carefully. "Harlow had an active communication channel open with Carlo Moretti. The documentation he was going to sell, Moretti knew it was coming. With Harlow contained and the server wiped, Moretti loses his leverage play." He paused again. He'll look for another angle. He always does, Roman said. We'll deal with it. And Marcus. Roman looked at the water for a moment longer. Marcus stays contained until I decide what to do with him, he said. Not tonight. He turned away from the water. He got in the car. He went back to Blackthorn Tower. Evelyn was still on the 47th floor when he came back. She was sitting at her desk, not working, just sitting, with a cup of tea that had probably gone cold and her hands around it anyway. She looked up when the elevator opened. She looked at his face. It's over, he said. She absorbed that, the two words and everything they contained. She looked down at the tea in her hands and then back up at him, and then she set the tea down on the desk and stood. Harlow, she said, contained. Cross. Federal custody. Reese. Gone. As agreed. He paused. He kept his end. She nodded slowly, absorbing the architecture of it, the way it had resolved, the specific prices paid, the pieces that were finished and the ones that weren't. She was doing what he had come to understand she did, thinking clearly under conditions designed to prevent clear thinking. Marcus, she said. Roman looked at her. I know, she said. I could tell when you came back up the stairs. Something in your face. We'll talk about Marcus another time. Okay? She didn't push it. She understood the difference between needing to know and needing to know right now. She walked toward him. Not fast. The same measured way she moved through everything, with the careful intentionality of someone who had spent years making herself small and was slowly, incrementally, learning that she didn't have to. She stopped in front of him. She looked at his face the way he had looked at hers on that first night, searching for the real thing beneath the controlled surface, trying to see what was actually there. Are you all right? She said. He looked at her. It was such a simple question, the simplest question. He couldn't remember the last time someone had asked it of him in a way that expected a real answer. I will be, he said. She nodded. Then she did something that surprised him. She reached up and put her hand briefly against his jaw, the way you might check the temperature of something, or confirm that something was still there. Her palm was warm. The contact lasted 2 seconds. 3. Then she lowered her hand. He stood very still. Go home, she said. Or wherever you go when things are done. I have work. It'll be there in the morning. She went back to her desk and picked up her bag. Walk me to the elevator. You can go back up. He walked her to the elevator. They stood in the corridor and waited, and neither of them said anything, and it was not uncomfortable. It was the particular quiet of two people who had been through something compressed and violent and were now on the other side of it, and finding that the other side was just ordinary space, just a hallway, just a normal human silence. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. She looked at him. Roman. What? The thing you said. The first night. She held the doors with one hand. That I work for you, that you take care of what's yours. He waited. I want you to know, she said carefully, that I don't need to be taken care of. I need... She paused, found the words. I need someone who doesn't flinch when I'm more than they expected. That's all. He looked at her. I know, he said. She studied his face for one more moment. Then she let the doors close. He stood in the empty corridor and listened to the elevator descend and thought about what she had said, and how long it had been since someone asked him something that required him to actually answer rather than manage. He went back to his office. He sat at his desk. He picked up the Colton freight audit and set it back down without opening it. Then the Harlow file. Same thing. He looked at the city through 47 floors of rain-cleaned glass, the skyline doing what it always did, burning and demanding and refusing to be anything but itself, no matter what happened in the buildings that made it up. He thought about Marcus. 9 years. He had made his decision about Marcus on the pier, standing over the water, but he had not said it out loud yet, and the saying was a different thing from the deciding. Marcus would leave the organization, that was certain. The particulars of how would take a conversation that Roman was not ready to have tonight. Not because he lacked the hardness for it, because some part of him was still sorting through the specific sorrow of discovering that loyalty, which he had believed to be one of the few things you could verify with time, was apparently just another thing that could be eroded under the right pressure. He had always known this intellectually. It was different to have it demonstrated again. He thought about Harlow's words. After all this time, this is the thing that breaks his pattern. He did not think Harlow was wrong. He thought about Evelyn Mercer standing in his conference room on the first night with a borrowed composure and borrowed clothing and sleeve pulled over her wrist, trying to be invisible in a room full of men who would have let her succeed. He thought about the way she had said, "I need someone who doesn't flinch when I'm more than they expected." He thought he was probably going to be a difficult man to be around. He thought she probably already knew that. He thought she wasn't asking him to be something other than what he was. He reached for the Harlow file one more time. This time he opened it. He turned to the last page, the page with Harlow's photograph taken from the federal file. 3 years old now. The man's pale eyes looking at the camera with the specific composure of someone who had spent a long time preparing for the moment when his enemies would be looking for him. Roman looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he closed the file for the last time and put it in the drawer. He picked up his phone. He opened the new contact number, Evelyn's new number, the one Marcus had never had a chance to compromise further, the one that was clean, and he typed a message that took him 3 attempts to get right. He sent it. The message said, "Tomorrow morning I'm going to be difficult to work for. I want you to know I'm aware of that. I'm also aware it's not a reason." He set the phone down. He waited. 2 minutes passed. The phone lit up. Her message said, "I've survived worse than difficult. Good night, Roman." He sat with that for a while. The rain had stopped somewhere in the last hour. The city outside was wet and lit and quietly enormous, going about its business of existing without apology. Somewhere in Brooklyn, a man named Daniel Cross was sitting in a federal processing room, learning that the life he had constructed on top of someone else's suffering had a structural integrity of exactly 0. Somewhere outside the country, a man named Callum Reese was boarding something that moved away from everything that had happened tonight. Somewhere in the building, in a room with a locked door, Marcus sat with the weight of his own choices. And somewhere on the FDR, in the back of a black car driven by a man who would make sure she arrived safely, Evelyn Mercer was looking out the window at the same city Roman was looking at, from a different angle, at a different altitude, through different glass. She had been selected, targeted, positioned, and systematically diminished by a man acting on someone else's plan. She had worked inside a cage so well constructed that she had stopped seeing the bars. And she had walked into a room on the 47th floor of a building she was never supposed to understand the significance of, and her sleeve had slipped and the wrong man had seen it. Wrong for everyone's plan except hers. That was the thing about plans, even the careful ones. Even the ones built over 18 months by people who understood financial architecture and human psychology and the specific vulnerabilities of powerful organizations. They couldn't account for everything. They couldn't account for a woman who looked directly at you when she was frightened, who said, "I'm not doing this," and then did it anyway because she was still, underneath everything, someone who decided things for herself, who asked, "Are you all right?" and waited for the real answer. Roman turned off the light on his desk. He sat for a moment in the dark with the city lighting the room from outside. He had built 47 floors of empire on the assumption that hardness was the price of safety, that the things you cared about became the things that could be used against you, and therefore the intelligent approach was to care about very little. He was beginning to suspect that this arithmetic was wrong, not wrong in principle, wrong in application. Because the alternative, the zero investment approach, the perfect operational detachment, the clean and cauterized interior, had produced Marcus, had produced 12 years of trusting Garrett and still not being certain, had produced a building full of loyal employees and not one person who would ask in the plain, ordinary human way whether he was all right and mean it. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He walked to the elevator. He went down. On the street outside Blackthorn Tower, the air was cold and clean the way it gets after rain stops. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment without the car. Just standing, the city around him doing what cities do. Indifferent, enormous, full of the sound of people going somewhere. He had a lot of work in the morning. He started walking.